All right. Good morning, everybody. I have Artur from Oxford University's Econ department. But Artur, you're also Ukrainian, so you may have some thoughts on some current events. Welcome to the show and hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds. Uh,
Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into it.
so my name is Artur Doshchy. I am a lecturer in economics at the department. I also did my PhD here. I work. I am not a political scientist. I work on the theoretical. I work on theoretical macroeconomics and financial models. But I am Ukrainian, and of course, I've been following the news very closely and doing what I can to help. Um,
Yeah, how do you think if we kind of tie the two together, your study of economics and the Russian activities in Ukraine, what do you think it is the motivation there? I've heard the narrative that, oh, well, Putin wants to restore the former glory of the Soviet Union, but I'm wondering, like, is there also some dollars and cents involved as well, or how do you think about it?
Um, so I don't think the um, invasion of Ukraine was rational for Russia or for Putin from the economic point of view.
Hmm.
Uh, you can also see this from the fact what they're doing with the land that they are attacking or managed to occupy. They completely destroyed Mariupol, big economic, which was a big economic hub. They are indiscriminately using artillery on Ukrainian factories, even on those lands that they are planning to occupy. So they're not getting economic benefit from the lands they're trying to take. And also, they, of course, suffered from the unprecedented sanctions imposed by the international community, which
Hmm.
is putting an immense pressure on Russian economy. So I really don't think that economics is the right framework to think about Russian motives. I think if if I were to outline why I think Putin did this, you wouldn't use only one. I wouldn't use only one narrative. I wouldn't say that he did it because of X and nothing else. I think um, it's a complex coordination of several reasons.
Hmm.
I think number one of them is that he of course wants to stay in power, and he of course wants to project at home the advantages of his rule as uniquely suited to sort of uh, uh, the population of Russia. And for him, I think the nations of former Soviet unions, they inherently like former sphere of influence for Russia. So they, of course, always talk about them, and they, of course, compare the countries who did how after Soviet Union collapse.
Hmm.
So having an example of a democratic country, which Ukraine has thankfully become after two revolutions, very close to Russia, which Russians look at and can easily compare how things are going, was really not beneficial for him. Um, as an example, how things can be done differently in a country that started in a similar sort of position. That's I think one reason.
Mm.
Another reason is of course him caring deeply about restoring. I wouldn't use the word Russian Empire, but going in that direction, restoring the sphere of influence that Soviet Union had. Um, he repeatedly said, even in the past before the war started, that he thinks that the collapse of Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy for Russians and for humanity. So I think he derives a lot of his motivation from that, and I do not think that it was a rational decision. or not at least not 100% rational decision.
Yeah. And when you think about the public opinion in Ukraine now, I would imagine it's must be near universal sort of disapproval of the invasion. Is that fair, or are there parts of Ukraine where there's some mixed
Oh,
allegiances or pro-Russian views?
I know. I think it's absolutely fair to say. I've seen the recent poll of the support of the incumbent president, and
Mm-hmm.
that was, if I remember correctly, 91%.
Oh
I
wow.
guess that's unprecedented for Ukraine. That has never happened before, but
Mm.
it simply reflect the national unity, the level of national unity in Ukraine now. Um, I've seen people joking that the person who did most for national unity of Ukraine is Putin, uh, even though he probably almost certainly didn't want to achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember years when I was teenager in Ukraine, so mid 2000s, and Ukraine was deeply divided politically country. So we had traditionally western part of the country aligned with the West,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to integration with European Union, and Eastern Ukraine, for historical reasons, felt closer aligned with Russia. And you could always see it in the elections and in the polls that around half of the population would be pulling west, about half population would be pulling east, and you also had a language aspect to it. That
Mm-hmm.
Western Ukraine predominantly was Ukrainian speaking, and Eastern Ukraine predominantly was and is Russian speaking. Although uh, there is a big caveat even to the language thing. I think people in the West sometimes think that part of the country speaks Russian and part of the country speaks Ukrainian, and they don't understand each other. So
Mm-hmm.
what I think is important for people to understand is that everybody in Ukraine speaks both languages. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody in Ukraine is bilingual. It's just for so every Russian-speaking person from the East will be able to speak Ukrainian and write Ukrainian and understand Ukrainian perfectly. Although
Mm-hmm.
they do use Russian day to day and they're like more fluent to it, it's easier for them to express themselves. And vice versa, if you look at the West. So to large extent, it is a choice, and I'm seeing a lot of people switching.
Mm.
Switching now, like making a conscious decision, like I'll stop speaking one language and start speaking another. But those days of this divide, they have passed, and they have passed largely due to the events of 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and started the war in the east of Ukraine. You could see a big drop in the support of pro-Russian parties, which before could easily enjoy
Mm.
almost half representation in the Ukrainian parliament. The support dropped to less than 10% after the war in 2014 started, so they become a
Mm.
like marginalized party.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think hardly anyone supports it.
Yeah, even in the eastmost parts where they historically had stronger affiliation.
Yeah, but
Interesting.
yeah,
Tell
but
me something, Arthur. I'm curious about, from an economics point of view,
mhm,
if you wanted to optimize for the welfare of the people living in Ukraine,
mhm,
isn't there an argument to be made for some compromise with Putin? I hate to say it, but like an extended perpetual bombing, it just seems like nobody wins. And I mean, just to be clear, like I'm very supportive of Ukrainian,
mhm,
sovereignty and defense, and I've contributed to humanitarian as well as the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense personally. So I very much support it, but I also kind of, when I think zoom out and I'm like, okay, well, if this
mhm.
kind of persists indefinitely, like how are these kids that are living there going to have any future?
No, I absolutely hear what you say. It's not, also like you, I disagree with the possibility of doing compromise with Russia in the current situation. But I do understand that this is an important question, and a lot of people ask themselves this question. It needs to be addressed properly and thought about properly. Like the argument, I have several arguments why a compromise with Russia would not be welfare improving for the population of Ukraine, and even though the population of Ukraine in eastern parts. Firstly, Russia showed repeatedly that if the military adventures end up with some sort of success, they eventually come for more. So they started. They snapped the war in Ukraine. Russia did not start misbehaving with the war in Ukraine in 2022. Before that, they snapped a piece of territory from Moldova. Before they occupied Chechnya that proclaimed independence. Before they snapped South Ossetia from Georgia. They annexed Crimea, and they also started the war in the east that lasted since 2014. So I think like Putin, as any dictator, he has a growing appetite, and if you keep feeding him without beating him off, he will be coming for more. So um, reaching any sort of compromise now, even if it held for some time, would inevitably lead to more and potentially bloodier war in the course of a couple of years when they had a chance to um, strengthen their forces again and think that they are ready to strike again. But that's even conditional on the fact that some sort of ceasefire could hold and could be honored. I also skeptical about that because in the east of Ukraine, what you could see since 2014, um, Ukrainian positions were almost constantly shelled. So as a Ukrainian, like almost every second day, there would be news of like some shelling of Ukrainian positions that some Ukrainian servicemen would die. But then, of course, Russia would say that we have nothing to do with it because it's like people's republics, and if anything, it's not. These forces bombing Ukrainians, it's Ukrainian bombing the peaceful population of these republics. So that would be the
Mm.
narrative from Russia. So like there is a limited hope of um, of any ceasefire holding. And the third argument is that ceding territories to Russia that like a compromise at the current level would involve is not just about giving them like real estate. It's also giving up people who live there, and we have seen absolutely horrendous treatment of people who ended up on occupied territories and happened to show any sort of resistance to the Russian occupation. Like if you look at Kherson, the city where when the occupation came, they had massive protests by local Ukrainian population almost every single day until the soldiers received orders to shoot at protesters to stop the movement. They were catching people who were the most active during these protests, and those people were simply disappearing. So nobody even knows where some of those people are. There were videos of prominent Ukrainian activists appearing on social media, looking down and like reading from the paper, saying, "Now we've been denazified. Now we are very sorry that we supported the Nazi regime in Ukraine. We see the light now." So they clearly were. This was done under force, and I struggle even to imagine what happened to those people for them to record messages like that. So to answer the question, like what sort of future for these children will be if they end up under Russian occupation?
Yeah. So I hear you that any deal or compromise with the Russians sounds like history has shown will be met with just more aggression after that, and perhaps like a very bad track record of honoring ceasefires and things of that nature. What is the how do we reach a point of equilibrium here? Because I just it's unclear if there's no compromise and there's no agreement and I don't see Ukraine. Like, are we saying that the end game is that Ukraine defeats one of the largest armies in the world? I mean, that seems like a very high bar.
I think not that's not that's not a scenario that is, as science fiction as some people could have thought about it before February 24th.
Yeah, fair.
The most powerful army in the world has shown itself like to achieve major strategic aims they set for them. They clearly set for themselves in the first days of the invasion. They failed to capture Kyiv Oblast. They failed to capture Chernihiv Oblast. They were now beaten off Kharkiv direction. Ukraine successfully carries now, as we speak, counteroffensive in the south direction. Of course, unfortunately, Russia is showing military success in the east, but it's also the place where they have concentrated the absolute bulk of their firepower, and they also, as I said, they're not achieving it easily. They are burning huge amount of resources. They basically have to follow the strategy of burned land. They have to heavily shoot with artillery until there is basically nothing left before they can advance forward. So they are making some advances, but they also paying big price for that. And I am not a military expert, but I follow quite a few people and I read about it because obviously I constantly feel the need to be informed how the things are going, and it does feel like Russian assault even in the east is sort of culminating. They may or may not be able to take the city of Severodonetsk. It's still questionable that they have moved towards the goal, but the opinion of many military experts is that past that, even if they take it, their ability to further conduct further offensive operations will be greatly exhausted. And Ukrainian army, I also think that, as one of the Ukrainian military experts said, Ukrainian army is not a bad or weak army either. So because I think the even the West for sure did this mistake. Russians did this mistake. I think even Ukrainians did this mistake that they failed to appreciate just how much army has improved since 2014. In 2014, like we didn't have an army to speak of, but since then we had a lot of people who served at the east and had battle experience. And I think like people also had this impression in the West that the only thing we fight with is Western NLAWs and javelins, and then we have nothing else. But Ukraine did have artillery formation, tanks formation, and so on and so forth. We did have all building blocks of the modern army and big victories that were had under Kiev and so on and so forth. They were not won just with javelins, although of course we are very grateful for them and they made a huge difference. So I don't think that banking on the victory is wishful thinking, and I also think that the West has to bank on Ukrainian victory. The reason being is, I don't remember, was it Carl Bildt, I think, who tweeted, he said there is no less moral position than not giving Ukraine enough resources for victory, but giving just enough to prolong the war. Because I think that Russia is not showing any sign that they want to stop the onslaught in the east. So they must be stopped. And I think the West has two options here. They could obviously stop giving any weapons. So it's probably three options. They could stop giving any weapons whatsoever, but without
Hmm.
Western support, Ukrainian army would not be able to hold. They could give the second, the desired by Ukrainians option. They could give the long range artillery system that would greatly help to stop and destroy Russian artillery before they can inflict damage on our cities, and that would potentially help Ukraine conduct counteroffensive and hopefully get the victory. Or we could maintain some sort of status quo where the West keeps sending some weapons to give Ukrainian army enough support to hold, but not really destroy Russian firepower and counteroffense. And that, I think, is the most bloody scenario that will lead to the longest and
Mm.
the war with the largest amount of destruction.
Yeah, and I suppose, as you probably know, from the U.S. and probably other countries' point of views, there is a point where you provide too much support and it's interpreted as an act of aggression, and it goes from defensive to offensive
Mm-hmm.
aid. Uh, and I understand your point, which is like, hey, if it's just purely defensive, it's just going to prolong the status quo. But a lot of countries are worried about, because Putin doesn't seem super rational.
Mm-hmm.
What if he escalates beyond Ukraine and interprets, additional long range artillery, or maybe even air support in some limited capacity as this red line that now NATO has crossed, and he's like a cornered animal and will then, kind of lurch forward against all of Europe.
Yeah, well, I don't think he can lurch forward and get all of Europe because the experience showing he is struggling to get
Hmm.
Ukraine. So I think I don't think that Europe should be afraid of Russian conventional forces at the moment. Even Sweden and Finland that are now applying to join NATO. I think Putin can threaten them, but I don't think he has much resources to do anything about that at the moment. And secondly, I don't think that West should be afraid of Russian nukes either, because I think Russian regime is still showing signs that it's fights for its self survival. Their survival instinct is still working, so I don't think that they want to commit a mass suicide. So another argument for that is, of course, that Putin is not a single person who is supposed to press the button and then the rocket flies and destroys something. There is a chain of command. There are several officers who are involved who have to all agree to launch strategic nuclear weapons. I don't think that they will unanimously be, yeah, that's totally a great idea. Let's do that. So I think the risk of strategic nuclear weapons, even as scary and apocalyptic as it sounds, I don't think it's very large. I don't think Russia would go the route, and they denied it themselves. Like their foreign minister had denied it repeatedly that they're not considering using nuclear weapons. I think they brought it up into like military alert, but I think
Mm.
that's just bluffing to put political pressure. And I think the use of tactical nuclear weapons is even less likely because firstly if they use them somewhere, they would probably have to use them in Ukraine where there is an active war. But that would mean like contamination and complete destruction of the very land they want to conquer and make part of Russian sphere of influence. And I think it would also lead to the complete alienation in the entire world, because currently, of course, Western countries want nothing to do with Russia, but countries like China and India, they're still maintaining okay working relationship with Russia, even if not actively supporting them. I think like that if Russia like crosses the line of using tactical nuclear weapons, these countries will turn their back on them too. So I'm not really worried about the threats. I'm, of course, like, reasonable people can disagree. I'm only expressing my personal position.
What do you think? What do you think is the biggest thing that folks outside of the Ukraine are missing when they follow the news and try and understand what's going on there, from your perspective?
Mm, yeah, that's a very good question. I think I think there are a few things that come to mind. Probably the biggest one that caused me a little bit of outrage in these recent days. I was reading some major newspapers. I don't want to blackmail them, so I will not name them. But they
Hmm.
were referring to. They basically were speaking about the scenario that we discussed of why doesn't Ukraine reach some compromise and cedes some territories just to stop this slaughtering and destruction of cities. And the newspaper basically said now the Russia has greatly reduced its military objective, and now it focuses its most of its offense in the and I quote unquote Russian populated Donbass. And
Hmm.
I was like, hang on, surely like Donbass is Russian speaking, but as we said, this is not the same as being Russian. Saying that a Russian speaking Ukrainian is Russian is the same as saying that English speaking Irishman is English.
Hmm.
Um, and secondly, of course, Russians is the largest ethnic minority in Donbass, but they're still the minority. I think Russian population there, according to the latest census, which was arguably a while ago, was about 35%, whereas the population of ethnic Ukrainians was about 55%. So of course, of course, there is a substantial Russian minority. Of course, this is a Russian-speaking region, but calling it Russian population, I think, is just perpetuating Russian propaganda. And I think, speaking to some of my friends here about the situation, I it feels sometimes that that's how some of the people perceive perceive the war in the east, that
Mm.
this is sort of a contested area, that this is not really Ukrainian, so maybe Russia does have some legitimacy at claiming those territories, which it doesn't.
Yeah, yeah. That I actually lived for 4 years in eastern Switzerland,
Mhm.
and you could call it the German-speaking side of Switzerland, but they
Uh-huh.
would not at all think of themselves as German for sure. Um, but well, Arthur, it's been really helpful kind of getting your perspective on this matter, and really have enjoyed kind of our conversation, and hope to have you back. Hopefully we can discuss,
Absolutely.
you know um, the better times for Ukraine and a more prosperous
Let's hope
future.
so.
And I really appreciate the kind of nuance that you're unpacking. And the Russia's an interesting character in that they do things that are irrational, but then I think we're hoping that ultimately they do behave in their own self-interests, if there is such a thing as they. So it's definitely a hard one to kind of pin down, but certainly just know that at least everyone I talk to in the U.S., like, there's huge support and admiration
Thank you.
for this incredible, kind of David versus Goliath status, where David is doing a really surprising job, and I know a lot of us thought, oh well, this will probably be done in a couple of days, and the fact that that Ukraine is really standing up is inspirational, and I hope that our elected officials in the U.S. continue to lean in and stand up for international law and international norms, and invading other countries is definitely not part of that kind of order that you'd want to see in the international community. So um, you know we'll send positive energy and military and financial humanitarian support, and hope to have you back on the show in the future. And I apologize that we had to have a short one because of my tardiness, waking up on the Pacific time zone. But hopefully we'll continue again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Arthur. With that, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.
Bye.